Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the presentation on business continuity and succession planning for mutual insurance companies called Here Today and Gone Tomorrow. And I titled this presentation Here Today and Gone Tomorrow because we could be talking about either people who might be leaving our business, whether they be employees or board members. We also might be talking about the company itself, because in today's business environment, it's sometimes very difficult to keep organizations, especially small to medium-sized ones, which many of the mutual insurance companies across the country are small to medium-sized businesses. It's hard to really think about sustainability without thinking about both the business and the people. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about business continuity, succession planning, and I'm also going to be sharing, if any of you are from Tennessee or Kentucky and were at the Tennessee Association of Mutual Insurance Companies conference in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee in March. I actually did this a longer workshop version of this presentation for that group, and I used an audience response polling system, and my presentation actually has some of the results of that polling from that group in it. And I left them in here to give you a sense of what some of your colleagues around the country, or at least in those two states, because that was the audience that we had that day, those two states really saw in relation to some of the questions I asked and some of the issues that many of you are facing. And you can be thinking about, well, how would I answer the question if I were in the audience, and compare yourselves. So I left it in there as a little bit of comparison for you to say, how do I compare to my colleagues, at least in those two states, whether you're in those two states or not. So I'm starting off my presentation with a very provocative question. How many insurance agents does it take to change a light bulb? Always like to start with a little bit of humor. And the answer to that question is depends on if the bulb burned alone or with the whole house or barn. And if you're in the insurance business, especially the mutual insurance business, like some of my colleague friends in Tennessee and Kentucky, you're underwriting a lot of homeowners insurance and farm insurance, and it really is going to depend. A lot is going to depend on what happens with the companies. So what's our goal for our time together today? Our goal is to really answer two important questions. Really looking to sustainability for a mutual insurance company, thinking about business continuity planning. I'm also going to be talking about best practices in succession planning. And I'm going to be outlining a process for business continuity based on the timing of any succession, whether it's planned succession or retirement of board or staff. I'm going to be talking about critical issues related to sustainability. And I'm also going to be referencing a number of tools. I have some assessment tools that were developed for this program and some other materials that are sort of adjunct materials for this program. Those of you who are signed up today will be receiving the entire toolkit. You will be getting a copy of this presentation in its entirety. You'll also be getting the assessment tools I talk about, and you'll also be getting the additional resources that go along with today's presentation. And that will be sent to you that information will be emailed to you probably tomorrow based on your participation today. So when I did this presentation, I looked at, how big is the organizations? Now this was a group of 50 people, mostly all from Tennessee and Kentucky, that were representing mutual insurance companies in those two states at their conference in March. How big was the organization? Over half of the people in the room had organizations that were less than 5 employees, and I can tell you that the 2% of the group that was representing companies of 50 employees or more were representatives of a large reinsurer that happened to be there at the session. How long have you been with your organization? This tells me that a lot of people have, almost half the audience have been with the organization over 20 years. Very small minority of the folks, 12%, had been less than 5 years. So the folks in the mutual insurance industry have long tenures and have been with their organizations a long time. And I've been starting off most of my presentations over the last couple of years with this thought that a critical success factor for sustainability in any business today is this: we must challenge our assumptions about what we believe we think we know. Because I find more than anything else in the world that people's assumptions and their beliefs about the world and their beliefs about their business and their beliefs about their employees are the things that keep them stuck. And we move forward at a much greater rate if we are able to challenge our assumptions. So I usually start out with that. A little bit about my company. My company is called Strategy Solutions, and we talk about ourselves as being a rent-a-planner and market research firm. We have a mission to create healthy communities, and we work with different kinds of organizations, all different sizes and shapes, because we believe that healthy communities are created at the intersection of strong private sector wealth-creating companies working with community and government in the public sector, and also integrating those support services with, agencies and organizations that are in the social service sector. And healthy communities really require all those different kinds of organizations to work together in order to create a healthy community. We also believe in healthy organizations, and healthy organizations are created at the intersection of strong operations, of product and service delivery, whether you're a manufacturer or you're a service organization, your business operations, how you do what you do, and the products and services that you offer are fundamentally important, but they also need to have strong finance, including access to capital and financial management, and strong support services, things like marketing, IT, human resources, back office operations. All of those need to work together to have a healthy organization. And the price of sustainability in today's environment is being able to generate enough cash to be able to innovate at the pace of change of the marketplace or ahead of it. So that idea of keeping up with consumers' expectations. If we're not keeping up with consumer expectations, somebody else will, and will likely soon be out of business. And then I asked this question: how long till the current manager retires? And of course I said, who knows, it could be a very long time. And I got things, 5 years or more. Some people were closer to retirement. And I was joking with some people who they expected their manager to live forever, which was kind of interesting. I talked a little bit, and I always talk a little bit when I talk about organizations that have boards of directors, about the role of the board in planning. Because the board member's responsibility is to sustain the mission of the organization as long as the need exists. And then, based on the mission, their job is to provide direction regarding the vision, input into the plan, and ensure that there are adequate resources necessary to implement it, and to develop performance criteria for the CEO or the manager, whatever you call that lead staff person in your organization. That's what the board does. And then the staff is responsible for strategy and developing and implementing the plan. And I know that in small mutual insurance companies, especially really small ones that have very small staff, sometimes the board gets involved with some of the day-to-day operations. I've seen some situations where board members were the manager. A board member was the manager before they retired, and now they're on the board and they have a new manager. I've seen some situations like that where they've kept some of maybe the investment analysis responsibilities or some oversight responsibilities for underwriting or things like that. that they continue to act in a kind of a staff support capacity. But for the most part, that's not a typical role of a board member. The typical role of the board member is to provide governance and oversight and to ensure that there's performance criteria for the paid staff. Let's talk about business continuity or strategic planning or strategic development, however you want to call it, whatever it is that helps the organization be sustainable. Strategic development really answers 5 basic questions. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? How are we going to get there? Who's going to do what? And how are we doing? It's actually a very simple process, but if you do it well, should have a little bit of sophistication to it, not just simply answering the question. The where are we now question should encourage you to ask the question, what's going on in our industry? What's going on with our products? What's the life cycle of our products, and do we need to adapt or change what we're doing to keep pace of what's happening in the industry? And what you see in front of you is a life cycle curve. Everything has a life cycle. We as people have life cycles. We're born, we grow, we eventually decline and die. Products have life cycles. They start, people get excited about them, the market grows, they eventually die. I'll give you an example. The life cycle of a toy. Life cycle of a toy, some people say, is about 10 minutes after the kid opens it on Christmas. The industry statistics are that the life cycle of a toy is about 9 months. Some toys, like Barbie, has stood the test of time, has been around 60 plus years, but has been reinvented a couple of times. Some products, they go through various life cycles, like, for example, iPhones, which were a disruptive technology in the telephone business. There's been 5 different iPhones over the last 24, 30 months. So those products are changing. People's expectations are changing. Do we have information about how our products and how our industry need to change in order to keep up with the expectations and what other people are doing? And I know one of the issues that are facing mutual insurance companies, especially ones who have traditionally been only property and casualty insurance, that more and more companies, the bigger companies, are bundling. You get your life insurance, your car insurance, and your property insurance all in one bundle. What does the small mutual insurance company do? What niche do you have? And thinking about that strategically and how you're going to keep up with the industry life cycle changes is an important question for you in the insurance business. There are others, but that's a fundamental one you want to think about. The other thing that you need to think about as you think about sustainability for your insurance company, you need to think about what stage of the organizational life cycle is your company currently in. Organizations go through life cycle stages just like products, just like people. Startup, adolescence, maturity. Some organizations stagnate. Some organizations decline and eventually dissolve or sell out to somebody else, and the owners go into a new business. Now, the thing to think about, and you see I have arrows there between startup and between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. I put those arrows on there because I found that organizations have a tough time going from startup into adolescence, and they have a tough time getting from adolescence into maturity. And maturity of an organization has nothing to do with chronological age. It has to do with the capacity for growth, the capacity for adaptability and sustainability. Any group that expects to be sustainable must attain the mature stage of the organizational life cycle and sustain itself there. Now, what does maturity mean? It means you have the organizational capacity for sustainability. Now, capacity is an abstract term. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. It describes a wide range of knowledge, skills, abilities, and resources that you need in order to be viable. And our planning approach attempts to help organizations build that capacity to have a sustainable business model. And why is that? Because I found over the years that organizations will decline. Like a startup never gets to adolescence, it'll decline and die. Some adolescent organizations never get to maturity, they decline and die. And I asked folks, well, what stage of the organizational life cycle is your company in? And, my insurance company friends, many of them said, well, we're sustaining, starting to build our new curve. We're looking to actively build that new curve. Some people will say, well, gee, we're declining. We never hit maturity, and we're declining, or we're declining altogether. And, I tell people, if you really want a sustainable business model, well, what do you need? I mentioned earlier, you need enough cash on an ongoing basis to operate all programs and services, run the back office, fully fund depreciation, and invest in new product and service development. Well, how do we do all of that if we have a staff of 3 people? And the answer to that is very carefully. And here's what you need to think about in terms of sustainability. We need a leadership capacity, which is the ability to inspire, prioritize, make decisions, provide directions, and innovate. We need adaptive capacity, which is the ability to monitor, assess, respond to, and stimulate internal and external changes. We need management capacity, which is ensuring the effective and efficient use of resources. And we need technical capacity, which is the ability to implement all the key functions and services and deliver them. And I have some examples over the next few slides of the leadership capacity is things like board development and ensuring executive leadership development. Adaptive capacity includes things like needs assessment, organizational assessment, knowledge management, succession planning, strategic planning, collaborations and partnerships. Management capacity includes things like human resource development and management, internal communication. This is the scary list. It's the technical capacities that an organization needs to be sustainable in today's environment. Things like fast, effective, and adaptive product development planning, that ability to create that new thing, sales, underwriting, training and professional development, information technology, the list goes on. And the most significant challenge today is that we can't just get some training in some cases and figure out how to do this. We need to have all of those technical capacities either in our current staff or embodied in a good consultant that we can rely on that can fill in the gaps in order for us to help take the organization to the next level. So then I ask organizations, well, how would you rate your adaptive capacity? Okay? And these results here, I asked my friends in Tennessee and Kentucky, these results are actually pretty typical. Okay? About a third of audiences, and I find this pretty much the case regardless of industry, believe it or not, regardless of geography. If I put 50 people in the room, I get a distribution to this question that looks something like this. About a third of the people say I'm doing pretty well. About a third of the people say I'm doing pretty good. And about a third of the people say I'm probably in trouble and I'm not admitting it because I don't have the technical capacity that I need. Okay? And then, how would you rate that was adaptive capacity. How would you rate your technical capacity? Most people rate their technical capacity a little bit better than that. So we got a little bit higher on technical capacity, but still we got about a fourth of the audience that I had that said our technical capacity isn't where we need it to be. So as you think about, here's the questions from the assessment tool that I created that I'm going to send you after I'm done. These questions, I think there's 21 questions on this tool, are questions that you can ask yourself. Do you need a strategic business continuity plan? Or do you have enough resources in place? Because a lot of companies have a strategic plan. It's in the heads of the executives and of the board, and it's not written down. That's okay. You don't need a 150-page document that's called a strategic plan that sits on a shelf to say you have a plan. As long as you know what your strategies are and you know who's doing what to help you grow your business, that's really all you need. If it's written down, great. Your bank might want it if you need a loan at some point. But some people just don't have the strategy. These are the questions that will tell you, do I have enough of a strategy? Because if the answer to a lot of these questions are no, if you don't know who your target market is, if you don't know if the target market is different for the different products and services, if you haven't identified your growth potential and where new customers might be, you might need a plan. Do you know what the strengths and weaknesses are facing your company? Do you have a vision for the future? Do you know where you're going to grow your business in what markets? Depending on how many no responses that you have, you may need to have a plan. Now, again, this was from my test group. 43 people answered the question, and I actually had a couple folks say all the responses were no, or quite a few of them were. And then I had some folks on the other side who said yes to most things. Again, a typical distribution. And some people may, in fact, need to work on a strategic plan. So if you need that, what does that include? Well, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, what's our vision for the future? Do we have a shared vision, or do we have different ideas about the future? What is the vision of the future of our company? What will it look like strategically or programmatically? What will it take the organization to get to the next level? And what are the priorities that will achieve the vision, and what business are we in? These are questions that you need to ask yourself. You also need to look at, our internal operations. How are they working? Do we have the most efficient and effective management structure? Who are our stakeholders and what do they need? And I actually suggest that my clients go through what I call an environmental assessment process. Now, this is a busy slide. Again, you'll get a copy of it. But the environmental assessment process looks at things like vision and mission. What are our market needs? What are our capabilities? What are our competitors doing? Who are our competitors in this space? What's going on in our industry, and what do we have to do to be different? And then, what are the priority issues facing us? And I suggest that we collect data and put it all in one place that allows us then to identify what are our goals and objectives. What are the things that we want to do in the future? And I suggest to our clients that we should write down what our goals and objectives are. We should put them all together in one place so that we know what we're working on. These are the things that are important priorities for us. And then I ask people, well, how would you rate your capacity to implement new initiatives? Because this is where I think the rubber often hits the road. There are very few people, very few organizations, and you see 4%, which represents maybe 2 people out of my group of 49 or 50, 49 that answered this question, that they've done everything they set out to do and are wildly successful. Most people, and again, this is a result that's very typical from audiences that I poll, most people, usually half of the audience, will say we've done most of what we set out to do. And then we have some folks that say, well, we've done some things. And usually the excuse that we don't do more is because we can't afford it. I hear that. We can't afford to do more. And then some people are just simply stuck. And here's where, we have to diagnose where our stuck places are. Because a lot of times, the biggest error we make as leaders is we try to solve adaptive problems with technical solutions. And I say that because every company that I've ever worked for, I don't care if it's a for-profit or a not-for-profit, if they've been intentional and say, here's our goal, here's the things that we want to accomplish, this is what it's going to cost to get there, they figure out a way to do it. They figure out a way to find the money. They will either trade off things or prioritize their sequence, or they'll take a leap of faith. They'll borrow the money. Or if they're a nonprofit, they'll actually figure out how to raise the money. But they look at it from a return on investment perspective, and they make the commitment. And this is what I suggest to people in order to get past your stuck places. Look at, what's it going to take to implement what we want to do? Assign it to somebody to figure it out, to do the research. What are the human capital and operating resources required to implement this thing? What are the expected outcomes? If we hired a salesperson or we got independent insurance agents working for us, what are the expected outcomes? What's the return on investment going to be from that? If we put more investment in advertising, what could we expect from that? What's the capacity to implement the plan? And what level of resources are required for organizations to be sustainable? And I raise that question because I have a number of clients who are very, very large, multi-million-dollar organizations. And my favorite example, and I hate to use this, but it's true. I have a client that is a $475 million healthcare organization. And they recently merged with a $3 billion healthcare organization because the $475 million wasn't big enough to be sustainable in today's healthcare marketplace. And I say if a $475 million organization doesn't have a sustainable business model without the back office operations of a bigger player, to have better purchasing power, to have better access to systems and to investments and to capital, then who does? Maybe the rest of us should be thinking about who can we collaborate with, how can we lower costs, how can we help our organizations be more sustainable? And it's important for us to recognize that sometimes we're just simply immune to change. I've seen organizations go out of business because the leaders involved won't have a conversation about how to collaborate, how to work together. A lot of collaborations can be done through joint operating agreements. It doesn't have to be that dreaded merger word. Some people are merger happy. Other people just don't like it. But people can work together and collaborate, even competitors. I have clients that are parts of alliances that are, one is 30 different organizations that are fierce competitors with one another. They've created a group purchasing organization together so that they can save costs on their purchasing. They will do selective things together that honor their competitive space without competing with one another. It can work. I ask organizations, well, how fast is your decision-making process, and how quick are you to get to the market with new products? This is really telling, because many organizations, I like this term, glacier-like. I actually got that from one of my other clients because they liken their decision-making process. It's glacier-like speed, really slow. And most people will say it's okay, but it could be improved. And very few people say it's quick and effective, that we can get new things to market quickly. But yet, we have to if we're going to sustain our operations over time. And if you take nothing away from this webinar, take this away, okay? There's a great book called How Stella Saved the Farm. The authors are two Dartmouth professors who wrote this book because they were having trouble having their clients wrap their head around some of the concepts that they wrote in their real book called The Other Side of Innovation. And there are many theorists and academics, actually, that say, well, you can't ask the group that's in charge of today to also be in charge of tomorrow, because the urgent always squeezes out the important. And some authors suggest that you've got to start completely new companies to have any kind of innovation or improvement. These guys, and I like their theory and I like their approach, they say if you have the right attitude, if you have the right thinking, you can save the farm, and you can have a sheep wool business and an alpaca wool business that are two completely different things running side by side in your company if you know how to approach it well. And the story is one of those little allegory stories that is very powerful. It'll take you an hour to read the book. It's really kind of fun. And you'll find yourself putting names on the characters in the book and saying, these are like people that I know. But it's a great book. It's worth the read. I highly recommend it. I also recommend that you actually write down your strategic plan. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You know, what is our objective? What are our action steps? Who's responsible for it? What's the budget? What's the time frame? Even if you have only one employee and you're putting your name on every single action step, that's actually a strategy that's recommended so that you have a to-do list that you can check off. It's a great thing to map out that strategy. It's also a good idea to write things down and to use it as a vehicle to create alignment between the staff and the board, where the staff will work through an action plan so that it's clear, relevant, significant, achievable, and reasonably urgent without being completely unrealistic. But then that'll allow you to say, do I need help from my board members? What kind of support do I need from the board? Can I organize committees? Do I need to organize committees to get things done? And can the board ensure that the manager's performance criteria is based on strategic plan accomplishment, not just running the day-to-day business, but there are certain strategic things we advance. It's really worth the time to try to put it together and do it. I also asked the question, you know, are board members active and understand and execute their role in the organization? A little over half of my audience then said yes, they do. Some said, well, maybe there's some things they need to improve, which suggests to me that going through the process of looking at, you know, what is the board's role in supporting our new strategic direction, in implementing our plan, and moving forward to ensure sustainability. The last part of the plan accomplishments is really looking at measures, recognition, reward, and tracking, which is an afterthought for most people, okay? I asked my friends in Tennessee and Kentucky, do you have a dashboard of performance indicators? Well, most of us said maybe or probably not. About half of this group said that they did, which is applaudable. This is actually a little bit higher than I see in most organizations when I do this poll. Most people don't have a dashboard of performance indicators that they use to measure success. And what do I recommend? You should pick 10 to 12 key performance indicators that really tell the story about what's going on in the business and track those. And if you do all of those things, that will help you keep your business going from a continuity perspective. And now I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about, well, what's succession planning? And what does that have to do with organizational continuity? Well, succession planning is not about replacing the CEO. And I actually wrote an article about the fact that it's not about replacing the CEO. It's about aligning staff development with a strategic vision to really look at how do we make sure that we have good business continuity, that we look at creating bench strength if we can, but more importantly, if any key manager or person, any key staff member were to leave, how would we replace them, and would they know what they needed to do in order to keep the business running? Those are important questions that we need to ask. Well, why would we do succession planning? Well, first of all, we might have to replace some key leaders, especially if they're thinking about retiring, but it's not only that. We might want to grow a talent pipeline for key positions. We might want to provide value to retain talent if we have some bright young people that we want to keep. So how do we get started with this idea of succession planning? The first thing to do is to ask the question, where are we now? And really look at your strategic plan, whether it's written down or not. And really just outline, what do we want to accomplish over the next 5 to 10 years? And ask ourselves the question, what are the capacities, knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required in order to accomplish those goals? The next question you need to ask yourself is, how far down in the organization do we want to go? Is succession planning based on a specific job or helping to create a pool of talented leaders? How will development be planned and tracked? How much of the succession planning is focused on inside versus outside talent. Some people will, I'll give you an example. If a manager is retiring, some people will look at possible candidates for the job, recruit them to the board, and let them sit on the board for a couple of years before the person retires. So they get to learn the business, that they get familiar with it, and they'll use that process to help select a successor. They also will do it internally, and they also will develop ways of documenting what people do in their jobs. I call that kind of documentation a desk manual, which would be, what are the key things that somebody would need to know if they came into my job. I didn't show up tomorrow. I hit the lottery. I'm never coming back again. What would somebody need to know in order to do my job, to pick up my job, and then start doing it if I didn't come back tomorrow? And these are all questions that you have to ask yourself if you want to think about succession planning. The other thing you need to think about, and this is a framework of personality types. Lots of people are often familiar with personality surveys or personality tests. Like a couple of popular ones are the Myers-Briggs profile or a DISC profile. This one is based on that same philosophy. It's based on the psychology of Carl Jung. But what it does is it looks at people's personalities based on their team roles. And when I do this as a training for people in person, I'll actually describe what these roles are like or what these personality types are like. And I ask people to go to the corner of the room that best describes them and let people see, kind of where they fit in the overall team. And the reason why I say that is because in order to get any initiative done, you have to have a creator, somebody that generates ideas. You need an advancer, somebody that promotes those ideas. You need elaborators or refiners. These are people that challenge ideas and define action plans. And you need executors, people that implement ideas. Now, some of us are capable of being flexors and can step in to fill any gaps, or can do any of those roles equally well. Others of us, depending on our personalities, like I'm a creator refiner by nature. So I love to come up with new ideas, and I love to continuously improve stuff. But if you ask me to do the minute details of the same things over and over again, I want to go screaming into the street. So I'm not happy in that kind of job. Other people, for example, who are executors by personality are not going to be able to come up with a new initiative and create a new product. They're simply not going to do it. Not because they don't want to, they just don't have the personality for it. And a lot of organizations stay stuck because they don't realize that they're asking people to do things that their personalities aren't well suited for. So I introduce this concept when I talk about succession planning or organizational development to help people use this tool to look at, well, how do I put people on a team? How do people work together well? And what kind of personality do I need in my next leader? Because you should be thinking about, especially if you are replacing a manager over the next few years, you should be thinking about, or your board should be thinking about, what kind of personality do I really need in that person, aside from the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they might also need to exhibit. And this next slide, and so you don't have to write all of these down. I am sending this to you. This next slide is a long laundry list of knowledge, skills, and abilities that one of my real clients, the client that did this, happened to be a long-term care organization for seniors. So it happened to be a nonprofit. But I loved the list because their board came up with this list. They also joked a little bit about maybe I should put walks on water as one of the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we need. But these are things that it's good to think about. What do I need in my next person to fill in a role? So you need to identify what those are. You also have to ask yourselves the question, if somebody in a leadership position is going to be leaving or retiring, we have to ask ourselves, are the right people in place to lead the effort? And sometimes boards of directors do not have somebody on them that have human resources background or capabilities. So you might want to recruit someone to the board or create a committee or a selection committee on the board that has HR background and experience that can help with that process. And it is possible for you to put a non-board member on a committee to do a particular job and not have them be a board member for a long period of time. So you want to think about that. You also want to think about, what am I really looking for? And what's my plan going to be related to the people that I want to do? Well, if we're replacing the CEO in defined succession planning, these are some of the things that the board needs to think about. We have to deal with personal and professional barriers. Sometimes people who are retiring have inadequate retirement savings. So we need to think about that. Sometimes they have unfinished business. Sometimes they simply don't want to leave. We want to think about all of those things and address them, and then form a committee if somebody's going to be leaving. You also need to think about, what's the communication plan? How soon do we tell people, and by what means? And I have a funny story about what not to do. I actually had a client that announced the fact that the CEO was retiring and they were planning to start recruiting for a new CEO by posting the job description for the CEO in the employee cafeteria. That was the only thing they did. They did nothing else. They did no communication. The CEO didn't say, I'm calling everybody together, I'm leaving, the board's going to be recruiting a replacement. Nothing! They put the job description up as a posting in the employee cafeteria and said people could apply. That's the way not to do it. You also want to look at, what kind of vulnerabilities do we have? Because the worst thing in the world for a new manager, a new CEO, is to come in and sort of uncover all these things that are not in good shape. Nobody wants to fix a train wreck when they come into a new job. You should be looking at, do we have issues in our organization, and try to fix them before the current person leaves. And then look at, what are our goals 3 to 5 years out, so that you can talk to people, potential new candidates, about what they would need to do in their first few years and have that be part of the hiring process. You also want to ensure that every position has an emergency succession plan, even if nobody plans to retire for 20 years. This is a very good practice for everyone. You need to look at, what are the critical leadership and management functions? And it doesn't necessarily need to be just the manager. It could be also key employees. Which functions could be covered by an acting director if they left, or by an acting manager? Who has the authority to appoint an acting manager, agree upon standing appointees who might provide backup? How's the board going to supervise this? All those questions should be thought about in advance and documented, so if your manager ever left or a key employee ever left, you know who's going to do what to fill in the gap. And you talk about it. We recently completed some desk manuals for a mutual insurance company so that they had the succession plan well documented, and they had tools that their staff members could use in the event that one of them left. If there's transition in 3 to 5 years, you've got time to develop people. Now we're thinking about strategic leader development and thinking about expanding the pool of leadership, and create some plans to build some bench strength. If there's an individual that's working in the organization that could potentially be the manager or the CEO, what can we do to train them to take over that position before the manager retires? If the transition is in 18 months to 3 years, now we're getting closer to retirement. We really need to be thinking about, what are the characteristics of the person that's already in that job that we want to replace? We want a person that's just like our current manager on these dimensions. What are the critical skills? Are the right people in place to hire this person? And if the transition is in 6 to 18 months, well, if it's only 6 months, it's not as ideal. At least 12 months is most ideal. You've got to look at the job description and say, is it doable? Can one person do this work? And I hate to say this, but in a lot of companies, when the CEO, a very seasoned, long-tenured person, leaves, it's hard to find a replacement for them because they have so much different kind of knowledge. And younger, and what I'm about to say is not a criticism, but oftentimes people today are such technical experts in certain things that they may not have the depth and breadth of experience or knowledge to be able to do a very broad skill set of work. I have a timeline. If your transition is less than 6 months, these are some of the things that you have to do pretty quickly. Your toolkit is going to include an Excel spreadsheet that has all of the activities that you should do in a succession plan that all you have to do is fill in the dates and maybe add some more detail to it. So that's one of the things that I will give to you. And in terms of critical succession, some of the success factors are keep the process simple, engage technology, and what do I mean by that? I use SurveyMonkey surveys or audience response polling system to prioritize the knowledge, skills, and abilities and characteristics that I'm looking for in a new hire. So that there's 75 different things that you want in a new person. What order are they in? What are the top 10? What are the absolute must-haves? What are some of the things that I'm willing to trade off if I can't find this skill set in a new person? Using technology to help you prioritize things is very helpful to allow each person to rate how important they think things are and then rank order them. Align management within the overall business strategy and make sure that your board is on board and you have senior level support at both the staff and the board level for the process. And then we want to develop a clear implementation action plan. Say, what's our vision? What do we want to accomplish? What are the characteristics of the perfect fit for the managers? What will be the process? Who's going to do what? And then how do we get started? All of those things are important components when we think about succession planning. And if we're starting it early enough, we can put in place an employee development process that will help us build new leaders so we can have a pool of talented people that might be able to replace a key manager in the event that they have to leave or want to leave. And it's important because it relates to business continuity. If we don't have the right people in place, our organizations aren't going to be sustainable. If we don't have the right strategy in place, our organizations are not going to be sustainable. And if you do both, if you think about our leadership, we think about how sustainable it is, how we're going to build new leaders, and how that fits into our overall business strategy, you're going to be much more successful. You're going to be much more likely to have a solid strategy and be successful over the long run. So with that, I am going to unmute.
The conference has been unmuted.
And ask y'all if you have any questions. Anyone on the call have any questions? I'd be happy to stay on for a few minutes and answer any questions that anyone has. My daughter calling me.